About 20 million children are said to be out of school in Nigeria, and roughly half of that number are girl children. And so, while authorities and partners race to get these children back to the classrooms, other factors such as poverty and, of course, climate change have combined to exacerbate the situation. Child rights policy, particularly the girl child, is our focus on the policy with Leah this week. And don't forget, we have our complimentary segments, Simplify These and Markets. The policy with Leah is streaming on YouTube at Saban Media Services. Let's start the business of the day from the trends table, and all our developments this week are coming from the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF.
Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, has said that economies like Nigeria and others implementing economic reforms must focus on social safety nets that cushion the impact of such reforms on the vulnerable and the poor. Mr. Edun, who leads the Nigerian delegation to the annual meetings, has in his company the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Olayemi Kadoso. The minister, in his engagement at the World Bank, spoke on affordable energy to 300 million households in Africa and the 90 million Nigerians who do not have access to electricity.
I've not quite got it right. So I think our compact will be pushing us in the direction of market-based solutions in terms of pricing, in terms of investment, in terms of entry and exit into the electricity market.
In assuring investors, Edun said NNPCL would soon start clearing debt owed marketers. NNPCL last month admitted to owing $6 billion to suppliers of petrol. The World Bank Group has announced a strategic pivot in its approach to agribusiness with a goal to create a comprehensive ecosystem for the industry. The shift will combine a new way of working with a new level of investment, doubling its agri-finance and agribusiness commitments to $9 billion annually by 2030. Ajay Banga, president of the World Bank Group, said the new approach arrives as four trends are fundamentally reshaping the agribusiness landscape: climate change, innovations in finance, digitalization, and solutions to fragmentation.
That's the focus and energy, along with the agribusiness and gender announcements. That's what we're up to. The world is the world right now, and rather than use the meetings to go over what we already seem to know, which is to admire the problem, I'd like to take the annual meetings to doing something about what we can do as institutions.
It also aims to take advantage of demand for food that is set to increase by 60% in the coming decades and respond to critical needs for jobs in emerging markets. Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund IMF, says women need to be brought into high-level leadership positions for the sake of world peace. In her opening remarks at the ongoing IMF and World Bank annual meetings, Georgieva said although progress has been achieved in terms of gender parity in leadership, there are still too many men in power compared to women.
We are at a point in our history when we see some pushback on equality, on the role of women in our societies, and this tremendous progress we have achieved cannot possibly be given away.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has lowered its global growth forecast for next year and warned of accelerating risk from wars to trade protectionism, just as it credited central banks for taming inflation without sending nations into recession. In its World Economic Outlook at the annual meetings, the fund left the projection for this year unchanged at 3.2%, but cut Nigeria's forecast to 2.9%.
Where inflation is very high, you would recommend tight monetary policy, and in some cases, when possible, help by consolidation on the fiscal side.
IMF said growth projections for the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa worsened with climate, conflict, and civil unrest impacting their economies, with many developing countries facing challenges with paying their debts.
This is certainly a region that's been adversely impacted by weather shocks and in some cases, conflict. So the growth remains subdued and somewhat uneven.
As I informed you earlier, our policy conversation this week is on the girl child, and here is that conversation with Nabila Aguele, who is the country chief executive officer of Malala Fund to Nigeria. Data from UNICEF shows that more than 7 million girls are out of school in Nigeria, and of that number, about 3.9 million are out of school at the basic primary level, with 3.7 million at the junior secondary school level. And of this figure, it's showing that 50% of girls in Nigeria are not attending school at all. And of this number, 48 million of them, rather 48% of them are in the northeast and northwestern part of the country. Joining me for this conversation is Nabila Aguele. She is Malala Fund Chief Executive for Nigeria. She's a lawyer and has so many feathers to her cap, actually. It's nice to have you join me, Nabila, for this conversation.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you for having us on to discuss this really important issue that I know is very near and dear to both our hearts.
Of course, of course. And I've painted the picture already, but I believe there's so much more to it. What is the state of the girl child in Nigeria, particularly when we're talking education?
So as you've painted, I mean, you've shared the numbers. The numbers are shocking and quite dire. Despite many efforts, whether it's from government or international partners, we still have a long way to go in terms of ensuring that girls are able to access and complete 12 years of education in Nigeria. The barriers are multiple and very complicated and often layered. So you have issues around sort of urban versus rural access. We have issues of insecurity, climate shocks like what we've seen in Borno, Maiduguri recently, how that's impacted the community at scale and of course will prevent children and girls in particular from going to school. There are also issues, other barriers such as socioeconomic issues, cultural norms, as well as practices such as child marriage and child labor. So we have a lot of work to do. In Nigeria, we do not lack for policies. There are a multitude of policies and laws that protect the rights of children and especially of girls to go to school. But we suffer from a lack of implementation and a lack of adequate financing. We need more money to be spent in those areas, but also we need the quality of the spend to be really brought up. We need gender responsive sector plans, budgets, accountability, really the fundamentals. And we really need to be looking at systematic long-term interventions that get to the heart of the issue and ensure that more girls are able to go to school.
Absolutely. Ensuring more girls get to school, and it actually breaks my heart that we're having to come back to these conversations over and over again. This year, for instance, the UN announced a theme for the International Day of the Girl Child as Girl Vision, and perhaps you give me some form of insight, the vision and the future of the girl child.
So the Girl Vision theme is a really important one, and it's very much central to our mission at Malala Fund, which is that we center the wants and the needs of girls in everything that we do, and ultimately we are working to ensure their ability to access and complete education through our grant giving and through our advocacy alongside grantees. Now, when we say Girl Vision, it really fundamentally means that we honor and we listen to the wants, the demands, and the needs of girls, that those things are factored into decision making, whether it's by policy makers, whether it's by organizations such as the Malala Fund in designing interventions, and also that we ensure that they have a seat at the table. Just last week, as part of International Day of the Girl, we hosted here in Nigeria an event themed Girl Vision, a call to action for policy change. And we hosted a number of policy representatives, both from the legislative side as well as from the executive side. Ministry of Education was represented, Senate, House of Representatives was also represented, as well as development partners. And the goal was to have girls, represented by members of our Girl Fellow program, speak their demands, speak to their unique experiences, and really demonstrate that they know exactly what the circumstances are, what is at risk. They fully understand and want to go to school. And they are part of the solution in terms of thinking about how to address some of the barriers to their ability to go to school.
I may have to just deviate. I need to follow up on this.
Yeah.
Basically, what was the room like when the girls spoke?
It was incredibly electric. You know, first of all, what struck many of us is how infrequently we hear from girls or beneficiaries, right? Many in the room, including those who are designing and implementing programs for adolescent girls, commented that, you know, how revealing the conversation was, how much they learned, how impressed and inspired they were by the stories like that of Halima, who overcame sociocultural barriers to go to school, Martha, who overcame other challenges and now uses her platform to support other girls. And there was also a panel, including a young woman representative who literally stole the show. Had all her points, was able to go toe-to-toe with senior representatives from government and from development partners. So it was electric, it was inspiring. The girls felt heard, they felt seen, and the call to action was that, you know, these conversations should not be relegated to a moment in time, International Day of the Girl, right? These are conversations that should be had year-round, and these young girls are just as on top of the issues, substantive issues, and just as able to hold their own with stakeholders. And they should be in the rooms. They should be in the rooms both from ideation to design to implementation and evaluation. So it was a really inspiring moment, and many stakeholders in the room committed to future engagements, to hosting members of our Girl program and Girl Fellows in their offices for further conversation, and to thinking more critically about how to incorporate those voices into the work they do.
Okay, so looking at where we're coming from, you've had engagements with across sector, from the policymakers to partners that you've already pointed out, and I'll be wondering, what are those areas you find that Nigeria needs to work on and to change?
Right. So there are a multitude of areas. You know, I mentioned earlier the need for implementation. So we're at a stage where we have a lot of guides, whether it's policies, frameworks, commitments that we've made, whether it's domestically, regionally, or internationally. We now need to do the work of honoring those commitments and building the systems, reconfiguring our systems, whether it's the interplay between federal, state, and local government, ensuring that there's accountability measures, that there's actual planning with targeted budget line items that speak to the barriers, some of the barriers that I've raised. I mean, it's the fundamentals. So that for us is a priority, and that has been raised by everyone. We don't need more rules and laws to be passed. We need to really honor the ones that we've already done, such as the Child Rights Act, the Universal Basic Education Act, and others that guarantee right to education and set in place mechanisms to honor that. At Malala Fund, moving forward, and even now, we think about these issues in terms of two pillars. There's the financing pillar, which I hinted at earlier. Really, we need to, in Nigeria, honor our own commitment as made in 2021 at the Global Education Summit to increase the budgetary allocation for education to at least 4% of GDP. And 22.5% of budget. That is paramount. Our overall spend in this sector is woefully below par, and it's not going to get us to where we need to get to, especially given the numbers as you've painted earlier. Now, even with that, right, and recognizing, I mean, we're not tone deaf. You and I, we are Nigerians. We're sitting in Nigeria. We know what's happening in terms of the cost of living crisis, the macroeconomic and fiscal environment. Even without the bandwidth, you know, to raise revenues, to bring in more money in the sector, we can be a lot more careful. Governments at federal, state, local can be a lot more careful and intentional about how they spend that money. And the key there is gender responsive education sector planning. It's as simple as that. Global Partnership for Education has stated this. We at Malala Fund are currently supporting a number of organizations, including Invictus Africa, Hallmark Initiative, Leadership Initiative, and Youth Hub Africa, that are doing projects across different states to push for gender responsive education sector planning and budgeting. Now, the other pillar is around rights, and we really need to examine areas around safety, access, infrastructure, implementing the Child Rights Act, which has currently more or less been domesticated across all states. That act has clear provisions around child labor, child marriage, safety, and the fundamental right to education. So those are areas that we need to work in, but I think taking a systematic and long-term view, building institutional capacity at federal and state level to implement, and really putting in place the monitoring and accountability mechanisms to ensure that monies are actually going towards the interventions that are needed.
You've literally taken up my next question, which is around areas of collaboration.
Yeah.
But I want to believe that there will be much more to add to that as well, and to talk about why we should prioritize the education of girl children.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, we believe at Malala Fund that it is every girl's right to go to school. It is a fundamental right to not only access but complete 12 years of education. It is an important right for all children, and especially with the disproportionate ways in which barriers affect girls, we push for girl child education and adolescent girl education. Beyond that, there are a lot of other benefits, and you know that I come to this work from a multidisciplinary perspective, and especially from the economic lens, from a fiscal lens, from a budgeting lens. And the truth is, the numbers speak for themselves. Every year that a girl spends in school increases her earning potential. It increases her likelihood to be able to join and contribute to our labor market. And fundamentally, adolescent girl education improves development outcomes for us in Nigeria. I mean, it's no accident that a lot of the countries that are doing incredibly well from a development, from a GDP perspective, prioritize education, and especially prioritize education and empowerment for girls and women. Other benefits include improved health outcomes. So girls who are educated through and through the end of senior secondary are more likely to make better decisions, health decisions for themselves and for their families and for their communities. They're more likely to have children that are well nourished. They're more likely to educate their children. In fact, children whose mothers are uneducated are not likely, they're very unlikely to go to school. They're more likely to be financially included, to be able to contribute to their communities and to their families. So it is a key accelerator for community and broader economic development, and it needs to be part of any policymaker's economic agenda for this country. If it isn't, then it means that they are not paying attention to the numbers and to best practices as demonstrated in other countries.
Okay, you're relatively new in office, and I would really love to hear your game plan, particularly what plans do you have for Nigerian girls?
So, you know, fundamentally our game plan is, as we've said earlier, to center girls in everything that we do, to really push for a recognition and for policy making and implementation that ensures that girls are able to access and complete school all the way through secondary school. We will continue to support in organizations such as Invictus Africa, Bridge Connect Africa, other CSOs and organizations that are working, especially at state and local government level, to push for policy change and implementation, whether it's through interventions such as the gender responsive education sector planning and budgeting, but also through work at community level to address some of the social norms that prevent policy implementation. We are excitedly in the midst of a 5-year strategy refresh. We will conclude our current strategy in March of next year. So we're also really thinking critically about what has worked, where we've seen the most value at the fund, and how we can take that forward with a focus on the 2 pillars that I've shared earlier, financing as well as rights and access. I think another priority for us is to really demonstrate the value of girls' education, both as a right, but also as an enabler and an accelerator for other development indices. I mean, you are reporting in this space how policymakers often find themselves making difficult trade-offs in terms of where they invest their time and their money. And there's often this conversation that, do we invest in education, or is it agriculture, or is it health? Our strong position in line with the data and in line with best practice is that there is no trade-off to be made here. Adolescent girl education is important because it's the right thing to do. It is their right to conclude education, but also it is a key catalyst for development, for health, for finance, for fiscal measures. So really encouraging and drawing in champions from some of those sectors to really make the case and really look at how we can take an integrated approach to policy implementation that centers adolescent girl education. That is a hope and dream for me. And then also fundamentally, we believe in collective action. We believe in coalitions and movement building, and we've done quite a bit of that already with our many of our partners, whether it's around the Chibok girl situation or around the disproportionate impact of COVID on education for girls, whether it's sort of a manifesto that was prepared by our grantees post, to inform the administration's thinking around education post-election. So really continuing to mobilize collective action and to center adolescent girl education at the policy-making table.
Do you think we're going to get this right?
I do. I'm an optimist, and what I've been most excited about as I've come into this role, I'm a little over 3 months in, is there's so much work happening. There are the partners that we work with are doing incredible work at state level, whether it's in Gombe, Oyo, Kano, Kaduna, whether it's around implementing or sort of getting the Child Rights Act domesticated, or pushing for UBEC reform, or pushing for gender responsive education sector planning. The work is being done, and by and large, states and local governments are listening, because I think they're at a stage where they need the help, they need the support, and increasingly my hope is that we're moving away from this combative dichotomy between policymakers and civil society actors, and recognition that we all have a role to play. We all need to join hands, of course leveraging support from global philanthropy such as the Malala Fund and other organizations. But I'm optimistic, because I think that optimism is a critical lever to drive change. But with that optimism, we need to do the work. We need to do the work, and we need to look at long-term systematic change, not sort of one-off nice-to-haves. And we need to have the hard conversations about what the realities are.
I must thank you, Nabila, for making time for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Leah.
Nice, thank you. Indeed, that conversation is an ongoing one, but we move to our education segment on this program, Simplify These, and from there to the markets. For more on rates from markets across the country, do well to log on to our sister website. It is www.marketnigertv.com. We have all the details there for you. We draw the curtains here, and of course, you can catch up with us on our various social media platforms. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave your comments, questions, and observations because we value them. Until we come your way again, same time next week, I remain Leah saying have a beautiful weekend and God bless Nigeria.